Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this new edition of the 1 Hour with Europe series of webinars. Today, we have the honor to have with us two very relevant and important colleagues from the European Commission, because we have on my left side Minna Wilkki, which is the head of unit for DG Research and Innovation, of the European Commission. And the unit is the one on mission and partnerships. And on my right side, I have Neville Reeve, which is the head of sector for missions. Of course, today we are going to talk about missions. And we will have a presentation on the latest about the missions and, of course, what the missions are, how they are conceived, and what will be also the future steps that are going to create this new instrument of the new framework program Horizon Europe. And after the presentation by Minna and Neville, we are going to open the floor for questions. So in terms of instruction, I would like to remind these participants that you can reserve your right to speak and ask questions by simply putting your name in the chat. We will read the names and we'll provide you the opening of the microphone and the webcam, so for you to directly address our speakers. So, without losing too much time, I would like to give the floor to Neville. And now we're going to share your presentation on the screen.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much, Massimo. Really pleased to be here. And we have, I think, an hour. I believe it's rather strict, the timing on this.
We are Norwegians.
Yes. We have a, I hope, entertaining, full presentation to give you. We will split, Minna and I, between us on this. We aim to speak for something like 15 minutes or so each, leaving plenty of time for questions. Under normal conditions, I would say, please interrupt me, shout, stand up, tell me your question, but under the kind of strange pressures we have now with the online setup, the new setup, that's probably not so appropriate, so the questions will come at the end. I hope that what we can tell you about in this presentation is what are missions. We can give you a definition in a formal sense about that, but of course also you should be able to pick up in all of the issues which we're covering, what are, if you like, the drivers of this whole mission story. You can see in which way we've presented this, the way in which we've developed it inside the Commission. So there'll be a little bit of history about the policy for this mission's work. You'll see some of the key steps which we followed in terms of our process internally, and I hope, again, to keep that rather entertaining, not too dry, but I think many people will be familiar with these concepts like mission boards, assemblies, and some of the aspects of the development process, particularly concerning our discussion with citizens. Minna will then go on to give you the very up-to-date story of how things stand in terms of this progress with the mission boards, and also look forward to where we see this going over the rest of this year and beyond, so far as the actual launch of these missions in the Horizon Europe context, but beyond. And I think this is a very important point to make. There are probably three key messages to make overall, so far as this whole discussion about missions in the way in which we're developing them. And that is, first of all, we're not just talking about research and innovation. If you've ever seen our Director General talk about missions, he emphasizes this point again and again. Of course, research and innovation is of critical importance. It is, in a sense, the place where we started. It's the place where we work, at least. But nonetheless, if you're serious about achieving the ambitious aims which missions should all be about, then you can see immediately that it's not simply about research and innovation you need many more things than that. And that's the step we've been going through at the moment as we try and build that consensus, build that engagement across the Commission. The second point to make about missions is that you need to speak to citizens. You need to speak to citizens, you need to resonate with citizens in terms of the mission you identify, and also the process you run to identify those missions, and in future, the way in which missions and citizens can actually work together very closely. And the third point I'd like to make, or we will make, in terms of this whole story, is about the rather special, different types of setup that you need for missions. I mean, part of this is about the way in which the governance is run. Part of it's about the steerability of the missions, because, of course, we all know very well that missions require a long time frame, possibly a longer time frame, certainly than we're typically used to implementing through, say, our Horizon Europe project. And in the course of that lifetime, the whole nature of a mission is about saying that you need to take account of how things change, how you can go in new directions, how you can stop things if it doesn't turn out to be successful. It is this governance, the steerability of the mission, which is so crucial. I've got in here a few slides on Horizon Europe. I don't actually propose to spend any time at all on these. They're a bit of background. It's, as I said already, it's the place where we started for our missions, and you will know very well that the missions are a novel feature of Horizon Europe, and the aim is that our missions will be embedded. I'm sure many of you have seen this structure before for Horizon Europe. The missions will be embedded in the Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe, which is, in a sense, the kind of analogue of, under Horizon 2020, the societal challenges part. So we see it developing there. But let me just go for a moment on what are, if you like, the key principles of the missions. Well, I mean, nothing is new, I guess, in research policy. Nothing is new in public policy. In a sense, you can always see the connections between what you're doing now and what you've done before. In terms of research policy, and I said missions are not just about research policy, but nonetheless we are operating within this research context, you can see very clearly the way in which this whole mission thing has evolved. You can see how emphasis on systemic approaches, say during the 1980s and 1990s, they didn't work tremendously well when you've got perhaps key challenges, key societal challenges like climate, security, food. And you can see also in which there was a debate ongoing about where and which government could actually play a part in the sorts of changes which are necessary. I think that a very important point to make, I mean, we're all very familiar with the work of Mariana Mazzucato, and her work, The Entrepreneurial State, was a pivotal point, a turning point, crystallizing those discussions, emphasizing the fact that governments needn't be so shy about the way in which they actually define in specific terms and time-limited terms the directionality, the intentionality of what we're doing. And you can perhaps go back even further than that. I mean, it's often made the connection between our missions and the missions of perhaps, you know, the moonshot mission. And if you look at the words of President Kennedy, May the 25th, 1961, he said that we commit ourselves, before the decade is out, to land a man on the moon and bring him home safely. There, if nothing else, was a great expression of what we understand a mission to be. It has that directionality, it has that ambition, it has that time-bound element. So you can see in which, in research terms, there was this discussion about the role of government. You can see in which there was also the weaknesses of more systemic approaches. And you can see also, in fact, that throughout the 1990s and 2000s, in the Commission sense, there were a number of key turning points, key indicators in the way in which the policy evolved. The Maastricht agenda of FP4, FP5, which led to key actions in FP5. You can see the work of the AHO report. In the early 2000s, they talked about the importance of demand-side structures to emphasize societal challenges. Then, takes me right up to date, you can see the work of Pascal Lamy, who in 2017, it seems very recent, but a lot has happened since then, was engaged by the Commission to look at the future of European research and innovation. And his work, conveniently called the Lamy report, but in fact it had this rather longer title of Lab, Fab, App, came up with the idea of mission-oriented, impact-focused approaches as the link between the micro level or the project level and the macro level. And of course, in that process also he emphasised the importance of impact and mobilising citizens. It wasn't the first time that missions had ever come up, far from it. In fact, you can see the work of many member states in this area. You can see the Energie Wende, for example. You can see the Dutch approach on integrating organisational, institutional, and regulatory change in different types of activity, which conform very closely to the idea of missions. But nonetheless, I don't think it's sensible or realistic to deny the fact that this Lamy report was such an important point for us in terms of the way in which we developed this approach. Following on from that, I mentioned her already, you have Professor Mazzucato, well known to us all, and she produced two reports. The first report, well, I've summarised rather simply here, came up with some key characteristics of what missions are. And if you look in the legislation for Horizon Europe, the draft legislation, if you look in the regulation, if you look at Article 7, you'll see many of those characteristics, is the word repeated, reflected, in other words. The work that was done with this report by Professor Mazzucato was brought in very closely into the way in which Article 7 of the Horizon Europe regulation is set out, and that defines what those characteristics of missions are. Bold and inspirational. I already mentioned the Kennedy quote, so I think you could get a clear idea of what that could be. A clear direction. In other words, this is the way we're going, and we should have a measurable, time-bound quality to it. We hope to achieve it before the decade is out, is what Kennedy said, and that's a similar characteristic which we're trying to achieve with our missions. Sparking innovation across disciplines, sectors, and actors, another key characteristic of what we understand to be missions. And be based on multiple solutions. In other words, you shouldn't just say right at the start, this is the only way to do it. You should try and focus on, you should try and develop on complementary approaches with the possibility that not all of these succeed. You have to have that steerability then to go in the different directions as your understanding evolves. In that report, Professor Mazzucato also put forward some examples of possible missions. Carbon neutral cities, plastic-free ocean, and decreasing the burden of dementia. You can see with the carbon neutral cities and the plastic-free ocean, of course, the origins of some of the work that we've been doing very recently. The second report from Professor Mazzucato emphasised a number of other important characteristics. Engaging citizens in this process. I've already said that it's a defining characteristic. If you develop something which has societal relevance, then you have to understand what it is that citizens are saying about this particular endeavour. And this point was brought out closely in that report. Public sector innovation. I've already said about the way in which governance, implementation, steerability are such crucial characteristics of how you do things with missions. And of course, perhaps you have to ask the question, well, do we have the right tools with that? Do we have to evolve the way in which we're set up? Do we have to break down boundaries? Do we have to have new ways of intelligence, understanding progress, feeding back that progress rather quickly to changes of direction? And finance and leverage of investment sources is another point brought out in the report. Let me jump forward because we're going at rather high speed here, and my apologies for that. You can see here the links to the Horizon Europe legislation, and although I've emphasised the fact that this is not just about research and innovation, our missions work, I would ask you to look at those because you see many of the points I've been making in terms of the way in which the characteristics of missions are set out, and you will understand some of the points which will come up in terms of the way in which we progress this. What are missions? This is a point that's actually raised quite often. Well, they're not R&I programs. They are ambitious, but they're not so broadly based that they're just a collection of stuff. They do have that directionality. They're not partnerships. They have a similar quality to partnerships in the sense that they bring together actors around a common agenda, but they don't have that same legal form as partnerships. Focus areas were features from Horizon 2020. They're not. But nonetheless, you can see in that focus areas approach the history of our current way of looking at these missions. And of course, they're not single projects and they're not clusters. How do we go about developing our approach to missions? Well, in the legislation, I just emphasised the connections to that. You need to see the way in which it was already very clear we would set up expert groups, but very powerful expert groups, independent expert groups, to advise on what those missions could be. And just in 30 seconds, we went through quite a competitive process. A year ago, over 2,000 applications. There were only 75 places, so you can see the success rate was probably way below what would be acceptable for a research project. Norway, I think, has 4 members or 2 members of the mission board and 2 members in the mission assembly, which is a kind of supplementary group which supports the mission boards. We have 5 mission areas developed. These are laid down in the legislation, and in fact, the process we went through internally to develop those mission areas is another story in itself. If anyone asks me about the question, I'm happy to discuss it. We started with 45, and then we went down to 15, and then we went down to 5. We tried to evaluate against the criteria in the legislation I've already spoke about: ambitious, bold, time-bound, etc. And we ended up with these 5 areas. So far as the mission boards, we have 5 chairs, 1 for each of those mission boards, and we're very happy with the fact that these are high-profile, extremely experienced people from the worlds of from the public domain, politicians, government ministers, Pascal Lamy, of course, European Commission, of course, and same with Connie Hedegaard, Walter Ricciardi, I think, Italian leading the campaign in Italy on the science side against COVID, Kees Vermen, and next Dutch agriculture minister, and Anna Gonke-Balz, who was a former mayor of Warsaw. We have these mission boards set up, and their job was to advise on, here are the mission areas, but where can you find a mission within those mission areas? And essentially that's what they've been doing over this last year, because they were set up almost exactly a year ago at the time of the first RNI Days activity, September 2019. And here you have some of that explanation I've just said, mixture of profiles, independent experts, etc. And there you have the role taken directly out of the legislation. The first role, and perhaps probably the most important role, is where are the missions? Can we find missions in these mission areas? We also set up, because there was such a massive demand for these mission boards, we set up mission assemblies. And they are, frankly speaking, people of equal quality to the mission boards, but the very nature of these processes where, of course, you need to balance other factors. Of course, we had to have a reasonable geographic spread, etc., etc. This was a way in which we were able to bring people who really, under any other conditions you would say they should be members of mission boards, nonetheless bring them into the process to allow these others to actually have a contribution. Our process has been very closely developed with the political side. We've worked with the Shadow Programme Committee for Horizon Europe, and we've also been in regular dialogue with the Energy and Research Committee of the Parliament, ITRA. And this has really been, I guess, fundamental to ensure we have that engagement, we have that collaboration, we have that sense of ownership in building this this approach. This is a little schematic to show you the different actors involved in this process: the Commission, mission boards, citizens and stakeholders, Programme Committee, and Parliament. Now, I think round about now, Minna, you'll take over, or let me just briefly go through this. This is pretty much where we stand at the moment. Coming up, we have the RNI Days, which is a point where there will be a handover from the Commission from the mission boards to the Commission on the missions. And these are the working titles of those mission boards which were developed in June. They've come on a little since then. We don't yet know precisely what they're going to be like. I mean, I think they finished their work literally this week, and we see next week what they look like. But let me hand over now to Minna, who will give you other aspects, the citizens engagement work, and also take us forward to the implementation side.
Yeah, while we are handing over to Minna, I would like to As you mentioned, the 4 Norwegians in the boards and the assemblies, to mention that one of the new professors, Neville Reeve, is a member of the Assembly on Smart Cities, and for what concerns the citizen engagement, that Siri Granum Carson, our director for TSO Ocean, has been engaged in a citizen engagement activity for the Ocean mission, devoted and focused on the Nordic countries. So I think that they just ended the questionnaire collecting the data under analysis. So
very, very good.
Please.
Thank you, and good morning also from my side. Like Neville said in his presentation, one of the 3 key principles or takeaways that you should have from this morning is the need to speak and resonate with the citizens. And that's why within the missions approach, we have a citizen engagement throughout the process. So in the design of the missions, the mission boards have been consulting citizens throughout Europe. In the co-implementation stage, we will also have them on board. So next year, when the missions will be launched, we will be consulting citizens all along the process. And then at the final stage, when we need to assess whether missions have been actually doing what they promised to do, we will also be consulting citizens and feeding back to the citizens how we have taken their views on board. We will be also doing. So a little bit more in details about the citizens engagement. So throughout this 1 year that the mission boards prepared their draft reports for June, they were consulting citizens all around Europe. And this summer, the Commission facilitated the organization of 10 online citizens engagement events. Originally, they were of course supposed to have been live in person big events, but since the COVID crisis that was not possible, we organized them online. And there you have a list of countries which were targeted in this online engagement process. In addition to these events organized by the Commission, the missions themselves have been active in organizing different citizen engagement initiatives, online engagement sessions, and some of them have had dedicated focus groups where they have tested their ideas with citizens, whether they resonate with what they think the mission should be. And Oceans Mission and Soil and Climate Missions also launched surveys and quizzes and even games and polls with citizens. So all kinds of different activities really to get citizens on board and to say what they think. At the moment, we have still ongoing. Today is the final deadline for submitting ideas. EU missions call for ideas, and if you are gonna circulate this presentation afterwards with the participants, that is a hyperlink actually there, this EU missions call for ideas. Have your say where citizens and stakeholders can say what they think and even submit their own ideas what missions should be. Moreover, there have been multinational sessions, not only focusing on specific countries, but with specific groups. And youth have, of course, been the next generation, our future. The youth have been consulted. In particular, we had 5 mission online sessions with European Youth Forum, also with the European Youth Parliament. Then at the moment, well, not at the moment, actually, time flies. So last week or 10 days ago already, there was ESOP in Italy, and there is always this city events all around the city. There are different kinds of scientific events, and there we had some of the mission boards active. And now next week we have the 2nd edition of the R&I Days coming, where we will have a mission-specific hub. So there's one on Horizon Europe Hub, and there is for missions, because it's such a new and novel concept and important new approach, we have a dedicated hub for missions. There will be several sessions. I don't have the timetable with me. The only thing I remember now from my heart is the handover session on the 22nd of September, where the mission boards will hand over their advice to the Commission on the reports that they have been preparing throughout this year. And that's on the 22nd at 9:30. It's a plenary session, and present we will also have the Council representatives, German presidency, and the European Parliament to show that it's not only for the Commission to implement this, but it's also for the Member States. There will be a specific session also on citizen engagement, and each of the mission boards will have mission-specific sessions as well throughout the three days. In addition to these, Member States themselves have been very active in organizing different kinds of initiatives and engagement events, and the Commission has been supporting them by giving methodological support and sending mission board members or Commission representatives to these events. For example, Neville has been going, when we were still able to travel, went to several of these events. We have also prepared communication material, what they can be using, and for citizens, we have prepared citizen summaries and videos, etc. Euronews Futuris is preparing episodes to make missions approach more public and more visible in Europe and throughout the world, in fact, because Euronews you can watch all over the world. And we have been putting supporting material on our website, and so that citizens have a clue what the missions are about. So what comes next? Well, we talked about Neville talked about the missions, how they've been working with their reports for about a year now. And in June, they handed over their interim reports, which are here, and they are all online, by the way. In the summer, these reports have been now fine-tuned, taking into account the feedback that the citizens have given, the Parliament has given, Member States through these program committee and the subgroups of the program committee have been given to us. And then they give the final advice to us next week at the European Research and Innovation Days. What happens then is that the Commission will look at the reports and make a public statement in a form of a communication, Commission communication on what and how will be taken forward for implementation. How do we decide what we put in this communication? It's based on our internal feasibility check. We check what is actually implementable. Is there buy-in from different policy DGs to take missions as an approach as part of their policy? So to different MFF instruments, different policies and regulation. And that's actually something that we are now doing at the moment. And after that, the group of commissioners in the project group will look at these feasibility studies, we look at this advice from the mission boards, and through the Commission, we write in a communication how we will implement missions. Also, according to the legislation, we have to confirm the missions, what we are going to put forward in the Horizon Europe strategic plan. In the current draft, we just have the titles of the mission, but the next stage is then to put a little bit more details there. So then after that, once we know what will go forward, what will be launched early next year, that will be also put in Horizon Europe work program, first work program, and in the other MFF programs where missions will be implemented. At the same time, we are also thinking internally, how do we govern the missions? Neville already mentioned. So there are these common governance elements for within the Horizon Europe governance structures, but also mission specific, how mission, or each of the 5 missions will be also governed. It's not only about implementation through the Commission instruments. What also is very important is the leverage effect, how they will be implemented in the through national programs, by bottom-up activities, local activities, etc. So it's really an over-encompassing implementation that we are looking for. And throughout the process, like I said, we will be seeking the advice and views of the citizens and checking constantly whether what we are doing makes sense to them, because otherwise there's no point in having these missions at all. So that's all from my side. I think we are ready to take questions.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation and also giving us an idea about the state of implementation. I think that we are even ahead of time. We have plenty of time to also accommodate the speakers' questions. So from now on, I kindly ask the people who would like to put questions to the speakers to just write the name on the chat to reserve yourself. Meanwhile, that the colleagues are reserving their space to put questions, I would like to ask you a couple of questions from my side. The first one is, of course, what are the budget expectations for the missions? Because we know that the multi-annual financial framework at the moment is very unclear to some extent, or at least there has been a huge cut for Horizon, which includes the budget for the mission. How do you think this cut is going to influence the future setup of the mission? Do you think that the ambition will decrease? Do you think you can manage with the cut? Do you need support in fighting and give more money to the mission rather than to something else? What is your reflection? Who wants to answer here?
Shall I go? Yeah, well, we are in a interesting. I was about to say entertaining. Maybe that's too far, but certainly interesting time as these budgetary questions are being haggled over. But the legislation for Horizon Europe at least says 10%, up to 10% of Pillar 2 could be spent on missions. You remember our original proposal, which had Pillar 2 at something like 55 billion. So you can do the maths. That would suggest something up to, from Horizon Europe, could be up to 800-900 million a year. Then you have to factor in that how many missions we'll have. Well, I expect we'll have 5 missions, but nothing is certain. This is the proposal of the mission boards at this stage, and as Minna has already said, there is a political decision as to which ones we go forward. Then you have to factor in, will they all get an equal amount of what the budget is? It's not guaranteed at all. Then you have to factor in the point that it already says in the legislation that the missions from Horizon Europe will benefit from funding from pillars 1 and 3, the bottom-up parts. They won't be programmed, but nonetheless, what they do will feed into the missions. Then you have to factor in the point which we started with, saying that missions are not just about research and innovation. So all of that means actually finding a budget is not so straightforward.
Okay.
Sorry not to push it back, but I've given you the absolute, honest, and open truth about how that is.
Plus the leverage effect.
Plus the leverage effect. Let's include member states' activity as well, because
Private sector.
Private sector. We've been absolutely clear from the start. If you just include what's in Horizon Europe, then they won't succeed.
Yeah, that's clear. I mean, of course, we still do not know what will be at the end, also because the budget is still under approval by the European Parliament, so the scenario is still to be assessed completely. But I think this was a very interesting answer, giving us at least an idea about the order of magnitude of the funding that the missions could have. So basically 800 to 900 euros up to per year
From Horizon.
from Horizon.
Not including pillars 1 and 2.
Yeah. but you know,
Gives you a start.
divided by 5 could be 150 million euros per year. If all the 5 are going through, of course. There are a lot of ifs here and there. Meanwhile, I notice a couple of questions are arriving. Of Dimitri Greux. Maybe we can open you the microphone so for you to state directly.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to listen to all of you. I just wanted to ask, when you were preparing the missions or the base work for these missions and involving citizens in this, how did you do it? Or has citizens been involved at all at this point? Do you have some examples of how citizens involved?
So basically, it's asking for examples, some more detail on the citizen
So
engagement.
examples of what the citizens actually told us.
Exactly.
Kevin, okay. Why do I call you Kevin? This is surreal.
No.
Well, I think the answers are coming in.
Just to specify my, yeah.
The answers, if I may, are
Just to
coming in
specify
different
my
forms. They're coming in people actually being very clear. These are the things that really worry me in my life. These are we already know from things like Eurobarometer that people put high value on health, for example. But then we have, much more detailed analyses, because of course we've got sessions on each of these different mission areas. So they've been able to actually drive down into rather specific questions about, not exactly the nuts and bolts of what a mission would be, but you actually see the contours, the shape coming out of that. And then you have other questions about how do you think that this mechanism could work? How can citizens be more effectively involved in the future? Should citizens have a voice in the monitoring of activities? Citizens are users of what missions will be doing. They'll be the beneficiaries. So isn't it appropriate that citizens can have a voice, have a way of actually feeding their ideas into the way in which missions will perform? And the final element is, how can citizens actually be involved in a citizen science sense in what's taking place? Are the parts of a mission, you can imagine a mission on soil, for example, where everyone has a little bit of soil in their window box. Everyone's looking daily at the quality of that soil. They're interacting, they're feeding measurements back. You can see all sorts of ways in which citizens can actually be involved. And those sorts of things have been coming up during these sessions, and you'll see some of those results in the mission board, or many of the results in the mission board reports, but there will be separate reporting on those mission citizens engagement sessions, the 10 sessions. But there is multiple levels, but if you're looking for the 10 sessions, which Minna gave the example of, there will be a separate report on that, and it will be on our Missions Europa website at some stage, probably after the RNI days.
And if I'm not mistaken, maybe like this, the cancer mission, for example, identified through this citizen engagement process some specific problems in countries. In some countries, there's no access to diagnostics like in other countries, and really concrete examples like this came through this process.
Very good point. They were really surprised, the mission board for cancer, how much importance was attached by citizens to prevention. I mean, perhaps scientists are always searching for the new discovery, for the next horizon, the next thing to solve, but citizens were saying, no, stop it happening in the first place. And that was, well, according to the mission board chair, that was almost a revelatory moment for them.
That's interesting. I noticed that Olaf Dimitri would like to make a reply. Dimitri, Olaf, I can of course let you also comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just as a cancer doctor, this is very important with the citizens' involvement, and we usually have some cancer organizations for patients, and those patients can give us feedback as well as our own patients. I mean, and this is these are groups that are very valuable to give back points and ideas for these missions, probably.
I think that probably what we can do, we can try to put you in touch with the cancer mission, and maybe try to exploit your contacts with the citizen cancer organizations, so to contribute to the debate, which is an open process. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe so. Maybe we can exploit the man at my right to put a link to exploit also the knowledge coming from Norwegian Association on Cancer.
If you send your email to me or Minna or Massimo, then I of course will forward your contacts to the mission board colleagues or our colleagues internally who work on that particular area.
Very good. Thank you very much.
And patient organizations were definitely consulted through.
I imagine, yeah, of course. So that's a good, very good to spot it out, Dimitri. So let's let's make the contact, so to exploit your kind offer. I notice in the list of people asking Sina Prestmo.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Sina, we hear you.
Okay. Thank you for a very interesting introduction on the missions. One question from my side, knowing that the missions is a method or has as a goal to influence public policies, what kind of consequences and effects can this have for the universities when setting up proposals and new constellations with partnerships and other partners for the research projects? Could you say something about that? Would the universities need to think in new ways when partnering up for proposals in Horizon Europe, for example, for Pillar 2?
We go there. Well, I would say that it is an extension of what we've been doing for at least the last 2 framework programs, but beyond that. Already we're talking just about the research and innovation side, of course. Already in Horizon 2020, we had these concepts of focus areas, which were devices to integrate the program, to place the emphasis on impact, to vision where the different parts can come together. And it's clear that the advice, well, it's very clear in terms of the advice we gave, the way in which proposals should be put together, and also the evaluation, that an understanding of the potential impact of the research you were doing or the proposal you were putting forward was an essential part of being successful. And the same applies to missions, really. I think the point is to say that as a proposal writer, as an actor in that system, you will need to be aware of the contribution of what you're proposing makes to the big picture. And in some senses, of course, that should condition the way in which you structure your proposal, but also you should be very clear about trying to reflect. I mean, we haven't come to this yet, so I'm speculating a little. And of course, the devices, the systems for preparing Horizon Europe proposals, they're still in the drafting stage. But you can see exactly the same sorts of principles being applied to the way in which missions should be developed in Horizon Europe as the way in which the focus areas, and before that, the key actions. And you can see the connections to all of that.
We have a question from Andreas Müller-Löcken. Andreas?
Yes, thank you. It's a sort of follow-up from what Sina asked, and it goes in the direction of linking the Green Deal and the missions, because we are all waiting now for the RNI days and the launch of the Green Deal call and also the mission reports. But I'm missing out the link between how to take the Green Deal call into the missions, because you're in the Green Deal, we are focusing on 10, 11 areas, and for the missions, we are pulling them down to 5 mission areas. So is there any, my question is if there's any ongoing activity on how to visualize or better structure the link between going from the Green Deal and onwards on with the missions. Would we expect the missions to take the same form as the Green Deal call, for instance?
That we cannot probably say.
It's a little difficult. I mean, this is a great question, yeah, but it's precisely the question we are wrestling with, frankly. How do you ensure that the missions are structured in, say, Horizon Europe? I've said the missions are beyond Horizon Europe. They are, but how are they structured in Horizon Europe? I mean, one of the possible approaches, for example, is to have a separate part of the Horizon Europe work program on missions. But what's also critically important is the way in which the other activities of Horizon Europe work program will feed through to the missions, and the missions can complement those other parts. Now, we have a lot of internal governance structures. You have to understand another thing in this set of features is the strategic plan. And you'll look at the strategic plan to say the way in which Green Deal is reflected in there. So we're not there yet. You know, I mean, I think that's fair to say. We're not there yet. We haven't yet got proposed missions. We've nearly got proposed, sorry, we haven't yet got Commission proposed missions. We've nearly got the missions proposed by mission boards. But the next step is for the Commission to look at those and say, yeah, okay, we think this could work. And then you can see that detailed work taking place. But I mean, it's a great question, but I'm sorry.
There is no answer at the moment. Andreas will pitch.
Maybe something to add that also the missions will be, or the mission managers, whoever will be then in the governance structure looking after each mission, will be looking at the portfolio of projects. So not only those under the mission work program, if we will have a separate one, but also other relevant projects. So those, for example, coming from the Green Deal core, which will be of relevance to the mission implementation, and also synergies and links with the relevant partnerships, which is also something that the previous speaker raised.
Regarding this portfolio of projects, do you think you can also consider in the future to include in the portfolio of projects contributing to the mission also projects funded at national level?
I think so. I think that's absolutely an obvious connection that needs to be done. It's been raised by, for example, Minna referred to the good contributions we've had from member states. The Spanish have been raising that point on several occasions. And absolutely, I mean, if we're serious about this, then not just research and innovation, not just Horizon Europe, they have to include that possibility of other contributions, and that would be part of that portfolio. And the portfolio comes back to the point I was making at the beginning about the steerability, about the multidimensional nature, the implementation difference that missions actually create for us. Three things: the implementation, steerability, the governance, citizens' engagement.
Okay. That's interesting because it gives other reflection also to be done at national level, and Norway has a very interesting and extensive national programs for research and innovation. Tobias.
Ah, it's Tobias we know.
I suspect you know this guy.
Hello, Tobias. Tobias.
Yes, thank you NTNU for organizing this very timely event, and I'm happy to see two of my former good colleagues working as best they can with missions. Certainly I will look for synergies with the portfolios in the Research Council of Norway when it comes to missions. But we know that the devil lies in the detail. Given the strong emphasis on interdisciplinarity and that missions go far beyond research and innovation, I assume that the language used in those topic texts and how evaluation will be carried out will be quite different than for the usual calls. Personally, I certainly hope so. Are you discussing this currently now with the mission boards or implementation agencies, research executive agencies? Because as I recall from trying to integrate social sciences and humanities, it's not always obvious. Thank you.
Good point, Tobias. We can't pull the wool over your eyes, not we try and pull the wool over anyone's eyes, but you know very well, very well the work that's been done on that. Peter Hartwig and his team, Aaron Cross, they still go further in that direction. We've talked with them about the way in which missions will need to build on that, already well-developed path in terms of trying to ensure a strong interdisciplinary quality to the way in which evaluation takes place. We should look also at the way in which the European Innovation Council works takes place, because of course they will have similar challenges. I don't think it's, I can't remember the word you used. You sort of implied it was near impossible. I don't think that actually. I think the way in which already they have the setup there with a number of evaluators, the way in which different specialisms can be pulled as a possible need when it becomes very difficult. I think all of that actually will serve us well in the way in which we approach these missions. But yeah, it's simply, it's no longer saying, this is an evaluation of microbial X or Y. It really does require a kind of cross-portfolio approach. But yeah, I mean, if you drop me a line, I'm sure that we can give you the more latest developments as how that unfolds. They're not yet set up for the rest of Horizon Europe, so I don't feel as though we're lagging or anything else with our missions work.
I'm counting on you, Neville.
Very good, Tobias. Meanwhile, that some other questions are arriving, we are entering the last 8 minutes of our 1 hour with Europe. Going back to the practicalities, now you said a lot of if, of course, if we are going to approve the topics, if we are going to get launched at 1 or 2, maybe not all the 5. I suspect this is not going to happen.
No, I don't think you can assume anything at this stage. I mean, that would be wrong. All I'm emphasizing is the fact that this is advice from mission boards.
Okay.
I wouldn't like it to be said that the Commission will only support a fixed number. All I'm simply repeating is the simple words of the legislation, mission board's advice.
Okay, so based on the fact of the adoption of the advice and the definition of the mission under the political decision of the European Commission together with member states, I suspect, when we could expect, in your opinion, the first call mission related?
Okay, I'll deal with this. I mean, look, for those of you who are experts in the way in which these processes run, I'll just talk you through it. The first work program of Horizon Europe, we're talking about here, is people have been developing those calls and topics in outline, but we haven't yet had a strategic plan formally adopted. You know, the strategic plan should precede the work program. Sorry, I make no apologies for the jargon, and probably there isn't time, but colleagues will have to share their understanding of this. We have to have a strategic plan adopted. The decision on that politically, I think, will come in early October. Then it has to become an implementing act. Of course, that's different from the way in which the strategic plan was done previously. So that will require an opinion of the program committee. So we could look to that strategic plan probably in the earliest it could possibly be would be late November, early December. In theory, it's still possible to have a work program coming very quickly after that. Certainly, there are there are many discussions on this. There was at one stage the idea that we would perhaps be seeing that work program in the early part of 2021, but I think there are now pressures to speed that up. So it's still not impossible to see that by the end of 2020. Could missions be in that work program? Well, it all depends on the decision which is taken in the next weeks, and that decision will be taken by a very high-powered group of commissioners as to where we go with the advice of the mission boards. Then it's possible we could see it in the first work program or the first version of the work program when that is adopted. If it wasn't adopted in the very first version, of course, as usual, there will be updates to the work program. So you could see that it could be in the early part of 2021. On the one hand, of course, you've got the pressure to get it right, do a good job, build the consensus across the political sphere. This is so important. On the other hand, you want to be not missing the train, you want to be there at the start of the thing. So I'm, again, not hiding anything. There are many factors, many ways in which this is being evaluated at the moment.
And a very big disclaimer, we need to have an MFF
We
budget.
We need to have the money, yeah. For the one who do not know what MFF is the multi-annual financial framework, basically the budget of the Commission, where one of the chapters is Horizon. So basically, there is the main constraint to make all this to happen.
If we have no money, then
that will be a bit tricky.
it's a new career.
But we have a lot of good content in place. Yeah. One final question from my side. I noticed that the colleagues in Norway seem satisfied about the contents. The current mission boards are ending officially their mandate at the end of the year, if I remember correctly. It's December this year, no? The deadline. It was mentioned that a reshuffle could have happened and so on. Given the fact that, of course, as NTNU, let me speak for the university I represent. We have a professor, which is part of an assembly, how likely it could be that her name could be taken into consideration for the reshuffling of the board, of the mission board, on the topic she's part of, or is this going to continue and the assembly will be in any case engaged in the future work of the mission boards?
I mean, there have to be mission boards. It says in the Horizon Europe legislation, the specific program, Article 5, it says there should be a mission board. It doesn't necessarily say what that mission board, how you could create it. It could be created perhaps from some existing structure. We chose to go down the route of having an open call. Big advantages for that, for transparency, etc. A lot of work, a lot of hassle from people. I think it's said in the original call that the mission boards would be created for 18 months, and then new mission boards set up after that. They actually didn't sign their contracts until early September, October time. So 18 months, in fact, could be early part of 2021. This has been, presented to the mission board members, the possibility that there may be an extension of these. There could be practical advantages of that to allow the mission boards to complete their work and to bridge that rather tricky, administrative gap between one program and the next. How we create new boards, again, I'm speculating. There might be another call, or there might be maybe use of the experts database, which is always one of those things. I mean, you can see how direction this could possibly go. Why to create new mission boards? Well, once we know the exact missions, of course, they will have a slightly different profile, needing more skills perhaps in implementation management. We don't expect a full-scale change, but nonetheless, you can see how it would have an advantage. Some mission board members say, they've been working pretty hard, and they may say, I've had enough of this, thank you very much, I need to do something else.
So
Or they want to take part in the calls.
Yeah, they may want to take part in the calls, and there becomes
it could be
conflict
conflict of interest.
But there will be some sort of continuities for sure. Some will definitely continue. Of course, we cannot go into
A big change, of course.
Yeah.
We have a final question, I noticed, from Andreas Müller-Röcken. Andreas, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I will be very short. It's not a question, actually. It's a challenge, because I really like the way that you are using the parallel to the moon landing in how to explain the missions. But I would like to encourage you to look at the next space challenge. I mean, the moon landing, we did that 50 years ago. And we know how to do it, and we know we will do it again. But the next challenge is the Mars. And that you should also take into account when you're talking about the next missions in the scientific world of Horizon Europe. So to look for the really far and far-reaching goals, I would encourage you to take that into consideration.
very good.
New storytelling.
Very good point. You don't always use the same old examples. We're aware of that. It's unfortunately one of the best around, but you can overuse certain images, can't you?
Very good. So, 12 o'clock, 1 hour with Europe. Thank you very much to all of you who participated. Thanks a lot to Minna Wilkki and to Neville Reeve for being with us in this hour. I hope you appreciated. For the one which would like to look at it again, the recording will be put in the webpage of the 1 Hour with Europe together with the slides, so everything will be at your disposal. And you're going to receive a questionnaire for a feedback in order for us to improve furthermore in the next appointments. I wish you a good and fruitful week and a nice morning, and see you next time. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. We have a virtual applause.